Hello, everybody, and welcome back to You Exchange, the podcast where I exchange my user experiences to change them, and yours for the better. I'm Jeremy, a mentor and senior user researcher with over 8 years of experience and a background in neuroscience. Throughout my career, I've had the privilege of engaging with hundreds of users around the world, spanning across Europe, the USA, Africa, and India. This has allowed me to deliver actionable insights that have improved user experiences with nutrition, automotive, delivery, and e-commerce sectors. I've created this podcast with the aim of providing my mentorship and educational content, offering actionable tips, knowledge, and guidance in the realm of research, specifically focusing on UX research to anyone having an interest in this area. And I hope that you will find this episode insightful. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. I'm very happy to be back to close this 3-episode series dedicated to mastering user interviews by giving you some expert tips for effective research. So, if you haven't done it yet, I highly encourage you to go back to listen to the first episode in which I cover the importance of user interviews in UX research, the distinction between interviews and other research methodologies, understanding their unique advantages. You will also learn when and why user interviews are the ideal choice for gathering insights. And I end the episode by covering the various types of user interviews. Then in the previous episode, I just covered how you can prepare for user interviews. So including how to define your research statement, your research objectives, the research questions, your methodology, your participants, your user session script, and finally, how you can pilot your user session script. And so this is the third and final episode of this 3-episode series. But before I start, I want to cover some topics. The first one is I want to really thank you to all the listeners to continually listen to this podcast. Really, I remember when I did the first one, it was like a joke for me. And now I'm happily surprised to see that people actually enjoy it. So really, thank you for stopping by and to listen for each and every episode, or even if you listen to only one or two, still thank you, I want to say. That's the first thing. The second thing, I want also to thank the people reaching out to me via social accounts, and also including the ones actually scheduling mentoring sessions with me. I'm really flattered by that, and I am really pleased to get to know you, to get to talk with you, to see how I can help you better. If there is a spot in my calendar, and if you think I could help you in any way, please do reach out. And finally, I want also to thank people reaching out through messages, just stopping by and saying that I helped them in one way or another. Really, thank you. And sorry, this was not final. The final thing is, if you want to reach out, you know, as always, that you can do it to give comments, feedback, for me to improve the show. It will only take you the time of drinking your coffee. So you drink your coffee, I improve the show thanks to your feedback. And also, I want to say that I do read all of the comments and all the feedback. Thank you all. And finally, this is a whole new format, way fancier. I have no stake in the company. I am not sponsored by them, but I am highly pleased by what they're doing. For me, it's also important to care about the user experience, not only about the products that we deliver, but also in the way we actually gather format. So at all levels, to care about the actual user experience. That's enough for these first topics that I wanted to cover before actually diving right in. And today the episode is dedicated to the last part of your preparation for the interview. I wanted to make a special episode dedicated to that because it's a whole topic in itself, which is about the script. So the script, what is a user session script, why you should do one, how can you do it in terms of format, how can you frame it. We will cover all of that in this episode. So you will learn some ways to organize your script first of all, then some links between some themes that you can have in your script and some examples of sample questions. And finally, not only how can you organize the script, but how this is important at the level of organizing your interview in itself. So the script is one part, but then it fits in a more global picture, a bigger picture regarding how your interview should progress from start to finish, let's say. So let's start. First of all, how should you craft your script? So if you listen to the first and the second episode, and most specifically the second episode, you will have understood by now that I like to divide, and this is maybe only my methodology, I don't know, but this is how I work. So again, it depends on the company you're working in, it depends on your team, it depends on a lot of factors. I'm just giving my way of working, and it actually works for me, and it has proven great over the years. But actually what I do is first I define my research statement, then my research objectives, and then I subdivide my research objectives into research questions. I will not dive into it again because this was covered in the previous episode, so that's why I highly encourage you to listen to it. And then for each research question, I associate it to several actual user interview questions. And so imagine that as a tree. So you have the trunk, and then you have the ramifications. So you have the branches. So the trunk would be your research statement. First branches would be the research objectives. Then you would have the research questions. And finally, you will end with the leaves. And the leaves for me are the user interview questions that you actually ask. And it is really, really helpful to make your script this way because, first of all, it will help you see if you are asking questions that are not mapped to any research objective, first of all. So a good practice when running user interviews and any kind of user research is to make sure that you are asking only the questions you need to ask. We should not be gathering data we do not need, first of all, because this is actually probably not ethical regarding the participant in it, him or herself, because if you gather data that you do not need right now, who says you wouldn't use it later? But the participant needs to know, because they need to fill out a NDA form and a data protection form, and so they need to know what will their data be used for. And so if you gather data that at the time of running the interview you do not need it, but in the future you will need it, and this is like very blurry, the terms of you using this data, well, this is not advised. This is not a good situation. I highly advise you against that. So that's the first thing. Drafting your question and mapping them to your research questions will actually help you to see if you're gathering data that you should not be gathering. And the opposite is also true. So drafting that will also allow you to see if in front of any research objective and research question, you are lacking some user questions, basically. And the format is really simple for me when I do it. So I told you about the analogy between the tree and the user session script, but you would ask me, in the practice, how does this look like? Yes, so good question. In practice, this would look like a table in a Microsoft Word or any Word document, any word processor, let's say. I make it inside of a table. The first column would be my research objective. The second column could be my research question. And the last column would be my actual questions that I ask my participants. And each row would be more or less a user interview question. And so, as a rule of thumb, what I like to say is no more than 3 research objectives by user research project, no more than 1 to 3 research question by research objective. And then by research question in general, you can address them and you can gather enough data with one or two user questions. Keep in mind that a good practice is to ask, even if it seems redundant, some user questions several times in a different format. Let's take an example. What do you think about starting this app for the first time? What do you think about the first screen you saw, for instance? Okay. And you could say, what do you think about the steps you took when you started the app? Okay, these are very similar questions, and I just thought about them. I didn't write anything, so this is a random example, and I'm sorry for that. But the idea is that the questions are very similar. How does that work in the mind of the participant? Well, it's very simple. The participant will answer you something for the first question, and the second question, it's similar but not exactly the same. So you can focus on something else and it will actually complement the question. We can think of better examples. You can say something like, what frustrated you? Or maybe a second type of question would be, what is the most annoying to you? Okay, frustrating, annoying, okay, but in one of them you have what is the most annoying to you and why, and so on. It's not exactly the same, so it will highly complement. Of course, you cannot do that for all of your questions because you will end up having too many questions. So do that for the questions that are highly critical for you, that you need to approach from several angles. I like to think about that with the triangulation spirit, which is the more you approach a problem, approach a problem with more angles. This doesn't make any sense, this sentence. I hope you understood me. The more angles you approach a problem with, the more accurate it will be in your mind and the way you will solve it. Okay? And this triangulation, for me, it's not only about the methodology. We usually refer to triangulation when we speak about methodology. So, okay, I will cover this problem through data analytics, and then I will also cover it with a survey, and then also an interview. Yes, this is great. This is the usual definition of triangulation. But consider that you can do triangulation at several moments, steps in your user research project, and even inside each step. So in this case, you have the script, you can ask several questions for one topic. So in summary, divide your research objectives into research questions, each research question into actual user interview questions. Some of them you can repeat them and slightly change the formulation, and you will have a good structure for user session script. And then what I like to do is to summarize my research questions by theme. So it's like, imagine, I want to understand, my objective could be, how can we improve the experience of our customers with the product? This could be a research question. In my script, so it's really practical oriented what I'm about to say, and sorry for the boring stuff, but the idea is that it works really better in my mind when I summarize all the themes that I want to cover in one word each theme, let's say. So for instance, I will have my first column, it will be my research objective with my research questions, oftentimes mixed. Then a second column, it will be just theme. And so in this case, it would be experience. Okay, sample question. What is your experience with product? Or another theme could be first impressions. So what are your first impressions of product? Why am I doing that? Is because the research questions, sometimes one research question can be subdivided into multiple themes. So you can say that one research question could be, how can we improve the user experience at login? And so you would have one theme, which is experience. Then another theme, which is sequence of events that my user is actually doing. You can have another theme which would be first impressions. And so all of these themes contribute altogether to the research question. And Usually, we have a one-to-one relationship between a theme and a sample question. So, to give you more examples, first impressions. The sample question associated would be, can you describe what are your first impressions of product? Expectations, can you describe the ideal product for you? Opinion, what do you think about insert topic? Knowledge, when thinking about insert topic, what comes to your mind? You test their actual knowledge of any topic. Clarity, what was particularly clear or unclear in this process? So here you have it. You have a table with theme and the sample question that goes in front of this. For me, themes are not only useful for me to summarize the data that I want to gather, it's also sometimes you can come up with that even before the research process and the whole research plan that I told you, the whole process that I told you about. As I say, these are ways of working. Each team, each person has their own, and design thinking should not be rigid. It's perpetually evolving, and so that is why many people can come up with many methodologies. For instance, you could come up with a script or questions and then your research plan, for instance. It's not the usual way to go, but why not? We could imagine a scenario in which you sit down in a room with many stakeholders and you have a brainstorming session of all the themes that they want to gather. And these themes, they can summarize them in one word. So you can ask the PM, product manager, what do you want to know about the users? I want to know about their experience. I want to know about the sequence of events that they do. I want to know about their opinion. Okay, these are all themes. It's just themes. Then you translate these themes into research questions and into actual user research questions. By actual user interview questions. So the process should not be so rigid. And I'm telling you here an alternative by which you can go in with your product managers, with your stakeholders, and so on. Now, how does the user session script in itself fit the bigger picture of a user interview session? So as you know, a user interview is not defined by I arrive, my participant arrives, we get to ask some questions, he or she gives some answers, and that's it, we move on. No, absolutely not. The participant needs to go through several steps. At the very minimum, he or she needs to be asked in a progressive manner, let's say. So the topics you're about to ask, some of them are very specific. So for instance, if you want to speak about the process of logging in inside an app and their expectations about this, if you ask the question right away, they might not be able to tell you. A better way to proceed would be to go step by step, from the most general to the most specific item. And so that is why the user interview process usually goes through several steps. So first of all, of course, you should introduce the topic to your participant. You should get their agreement for you to gather the data. You should warm them up. And so I like to think about this process as a funnel, actually. First of all, you would have a funnel, and then you would have a reversed funnel. How does that work? You start by introducing the topic to the participant. You get them to sign the agreement. You ask them if they have any question before starting. You remind them that they can leave at any time. Then you would get into some warming up questions. So you talk about themselves. You ask them some generic questions. So for instance, can you tell me about, I don't know, your relationship with technology, whatever. It doesn't need to be something related to specifically to the project, okay? It's just for them to get to be to get used to the fact of being asked questions and answering questions. It's as simple as that. It's just like a warm-up. We would not go run a marathon without warming up. It's the same when we are trying to access knowledge in the mind of our participants. We need to go step by step. And then we would go in blocks of interview themes. So the blocks of interview themes, each block is an answer to a research question, in my opinion. So for instance, how can we optimize the process of adding a product to the cart? This is a whole research question, right? So here you would imagine several themes. The first one being, for instance, sequence. What is the sequence the users actually go through right now? Another one could be pain points. What is their most painful experience? Then it could be expectations. What are the expectations in terms of the process of adding a product to the cart? And then this is a whole block. The goal of the block is that at the end, you would answer the research question, basically. Then the idea is to put the blocks on top of one another as if you were building a wall. And at the end, you would wrap up. So it's kind of a summary. You would summarize the key points. Maybe you would talk some surprising aspects you discovered with the participants. Here, I think it's a good moment for the participant to, if they were like tensed, they should not, because in the warm-up you should ease them into the topic. They should feel at ease of answering your questions, right? But here would be the moment to try to maybe not build complicity. It's not the idea, but is a bit probably the tension. I don't have the word. That would not be the word, but the idea is like, okay, it's finished. We can talk like in a more lightweight manner about the topic. Oh, I remember when you said that. That was actually funny. Would you like to tell me more about that? And so on and so forth. Without them, of course, feeling judged or that you are criticizing. Of course, respect the etiquette and respect the actual good practices of running interviews, of course. And after the wrap-up, you would close the session, and you would thank them for their participation, tell them that you're available to answer questions, and so on and so forth, right? Before moving on with the next part, I want to say that the blocks of interview themes, each one, are organized in my way of working as funnels themselves. So you start each block of interview themes by a broad, generic question to generate new and unanticipated insights. So you start with a broad open-ended question, then you ask some open-ended and follow-up questions, and then you end up with closed follow-up questions. So, for instance, a closed follow-up question. Let's go through it step by step. So, for instance, what do you think about the privacy policy that you see on e-commerce websites, for instance? So it's a very broad opinion question, right? Then they would tell you, oh, I found it actually a bit frustrating. And you would say, oh, frustrating. This is an open-ended follow-up question. Can you tell me more about that, for instance? And then they will tell you. And they will tell you some aspect that would actually interest you. So you can say something like, oh, can you actually, you mentioned that was, okay, can you develop this aspect? You go on, asking open-ended follow-up questions. And then, if a certain topic is of interest to you, you can actually end up with closed follow-up questions. So imagine, they would mention that they would prefer something being displayed in a less intrusive manner, whatever. So you can say something like, oh, so you would say you prefer maybe a small banner at the bottom instead of a pop-up. I know this is usually not a recommendation when we are doing interview questions, but if it is your research question that you want to know at some point, which, by the way, could be validated through a survey, it doesn't need to be an interview to answer this one, it's a random example, but you can ask closed-ended questions at the end of each block of interview. It's not a problem because you are ending the block of the theme. So it's okay. Then you move on to another block. Imagine then we talk about whatever the flow of subscribing to a service. It's not at all the same thing as the privacy banner that we see on a website. So it wouldn't influence asking a closed question. Whereas if you ask a closed question at the very beginning of the process, you would trap their mind into thinking that you want and you expect these kind of answers. So naturally, they would be biased, and you don't want that. So that's the idea. To summarize, I would go over first an introduction, then some warm-up, Then you would have some blocks of interview themes, and I would repeat each block. Each block of interview theme is administered, let's say, as questions in the following the process of the funnel technique. And then you would have what we call a reverse funnel. I didn't talk about that, but this is the reverse funnel, the wrap up and the closing. Why is that called funnel? It's because you start an interview with broad questions to generate new and unanticipated insights. You arrive at a moment where it's very specific to collect details, and then you have the reverse funnel at the end of the interview process when you wrap up and you go broad again. You can say, oh, I remember when we talk about insert topic. That was interesting. If you want to tell me more, feel free, and so on. So you can see directly that it's broader. So that would be it for the structure of the interview process. And now I want to give some examples into the follow-ups that you can do. The follow-ups are actually very, very powerful because, in my opinion, this follows the 20-80 rule. Again, I really love this rule or theory or whatever that's called. So, by really giving the minimum amount of effort, you are sometimes gathering really, really rich insights. So in this case, we are talking about follow-up. A follow-up is when someone is saying something and instead of just asking another question on another topic, unrelated topic, you would use a follow-up such as clarification. What do you mean by this? This is a follow-up to get more insights into what the person just said before. But it doesn't require you the effort of asking a new question. It's just bouncing on what was said before. And so this is very powerful, and I encourage you to use as many follow-ups as possible inside of your discussion so that you would gather more insights, because oftentimes participants do not tell us everything at the first try or at the first question or at the first answer. You need to follow up. And so examples of follow-ups, the first one is my preferred one, and it's actually very difficult to implement even as a researcher and trained researchers, because we are all different and we are more or less at ease with this kind of follow-up depending on our personality. And this is the silence. So it's basically staying silent when your interviewee has finished what they were saying. And so basically the silence will prompt them sometimes to finish what they were saying. And if you interrupt them, a lot of times you will interrupt their chain of thought. And so you will actually disrupt this process of gathering insights, let's say. So that's a very powerful one. Then you have the clarification by saying something like, what do you mean by this? Or content question. For instance, the other day the app crashed. And you can say, at what time? In what context? Can you tell me more about this? So it's like follow-up questions. Or they can say, and it stopped working. And you can say, stopped working? So this one is called the repetition. It's very efficient. Sometimes, without actually leading into an answer, you can just make sure you understood something by actually summarizing. So you would say something like, so to sum up, blah, blah, blah. And then they would say, yes, exactly. And then they would sometimes complement. Or what is called backchanneling. So this is the scientific term. Backchannel is everything we do when someone is speaking to us and we are actually showing them that we are listening and that we are following the conversation. Imagine the extreme opposite. If you talk to someone and this person stands still, looking you right in the eyes and not saying anything, or looking away and not saying anything and not showing any behavior whatsoever, you would say, this is really weird. Is this person listening to me? Is this person understanding? And so that is why the use of backchannels is an automatic process among humans that we use to communicate to our interlocutor that we are actually listening and following what they're saying. And so these are the things such as, yeah, okay, mm-hmm. So someone is speaking to you and you say, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, many times, all right, I see. Then, of course, it depends on the language. But these are backchannels and they're very, very efficient. Usually you will do them without paying too much attention. And finally, the conclusion: is there something else you would like to share? And you would get maybe more insights when asking these questions, because oftentimes they have, in fact, more things to share. A quick parenthesis: try to refrain as much as possible into leading your participant. So things such as, interesting. Yes, it's interesting to you, but try to keep that to yourself. Although it's not biased in a way, it can lead the participant a bit. So if they say something like, oh, I really like this button because, I don't know, it looks easy to use. If you say, interesting, they can think that you find this interesting because they are complimenting. They are giving compliments on the UI, and it's not the case. So you can find this interesting because it's the first time someone says that. But try not to. This is not a judgment. You're not criticizing the interviewee, but try not to give. Trying to give judgments of value of the insight right away. You can say that to yourself. And you can say that in the team when you gather the insights and when you communicate the insights. But try not to say, or imagine, oh, surprising that you say that. Can you tell me more? No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't say surprising. Because sometimes people can understand surprising as something negative. We never know. So this is, in my opinion, but again, everyone is different. You can tell me in the comments, you can tell me in the forum what you think. But in my opinion, this is leading a bit the participants. So I would refrain from doing that as much as possible. And thank you again for listening to this episode. This has come to an end, this 3-episode series. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did to make it and to go through it. If you learned at least one thing, please subscribe to the show, activate the notifications so that you do not miss any episode, share it with your friends and colleagues, reach out to me through the survey at the end or through the URL that you will see in the show notes. And I am thinking of making a bonus episode at the end because I did not cover all the topics that I wanted to cover. So you will have a bonus episode on interviews that will be more or less tips, do's and don'ts. And so thank you for listening again and see you in the next episode. Bye-bye. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you everyone for joining me today on New Exchange. I hope you found today's episode insightful and valuable. Make sure to subscribe in order for you not to miss the next episode. Share it if you liked it and leave a review. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics, feel free to reach out directly to me. You can find all the details in the show notes. And see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.